Hi, this is Cheryl Walgie here again from Astral Connections, and here with me I have Christopher Holmes. Christopher is a psychologist and an author. We're very lucky to have Christopher here with us. He's here from Toronto, is it? Ottawa.
Just south of Ottawa.
South of Ottawa,
yeah.
And I had the pleasure of meeting Christopher on Sunday night at a presentation he did, and was very intrigued with what he presented, and felt that I want our audience to learn a little more about Christopher. And hopefully next time he's here, he'll be here and he'll be sharing something with us, with our audience. Well, welcome, Christopher.
Yeah,
thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me out today.
It's my pleasure.
Seeing the value in my work.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I was really intrigued with some of the titles of the books you've written and some of the research you've done.
Yeah, my books represent my 30 to 40 years of studies of mystical teachings and modern science. And,
wow.
Yeah.
Let's start simple. Let's start with something simple, like where you grew up.
Well, I was born in England.
Okay.
My father had been a Canadian military officer, and then the family moved to Canada when I was just a young boy. So I've grown up essentially in Ontario. I've been in Canada, over 50 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, and I did my undergraduate at Carleton University and got my PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Waterloo. And then I was a university professor for 12 years in Toronto, but was involved in a case over academic freedom that was dragged out for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved on and worked in the Ontario Correctional Institutions for 12 years.
So how did you go from being involved in that academic dispute to a correctional facilitator?
Well, it was because if you're denied tenure as I was, it's hard to kind of get back into the academic stream. And so it was available, and I had 3 children by that time.
And you needed something.
While I was waiting for my case to be heard, I used to go and work in a cat food canning factory, trying to support my family. The whole process wore me and my family down quite a bit, just how it was dragged out through the years, and it was never properly heard.
And what was the cause of the case?
My interest in mystical and spiritual psychology, explorations of psychical and paranormal phenomena, and I became very popular among the student body, and there was overwhelming interest in my work. But in a way, I would say I was a bit too much of a powerhouse that kind of threatened some of the political structure of the department. Yeah.
And how would you say how was it different then? There must have been some reason why you felt you needed to be different in your research.
Well, what led me to the study of mystical and occult teachings was my interest as a psychologist in the nature of human consciousness. Because most psychologists say that psychotherapy involves bringing the unconscious into consciousness, or things that are outside of awareness, you have to bring them into awareness. So mainly Western psychology regarded there as being like the conscious and the unconscious, and I was interested, well, how about like conscious, unconscious? How about self-consciousness, objective consciousness, cosmic consciousness, higher states of consciousness? And what I initially became interested in the Gurdjieff-Uspensky Fourth Way teaching, which is an immensely practical teaching. And so I studied, that was my focus for 10 years, and then I moved on, studied yogic Vedic teachings, Kabbalah, Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, widely, but always interested in that issue, what is the nature of human consciousness? And
what did you feel that they taught was similar, and what did you feel that they taught was at odds with each other?
They're both completely contrary to each other, and the way I compare them, modern psychology has accepted what I call the head doctrine, the belief that the brain in the head produces human consciousness. But they've never been able to answer, well, what is consciousness? How does the brain produce it? Where is it produced? All those remain unanswered questions. But from a mystical perspective, one sees consciousness is related to the spiritual soul nature of human beings. Okay? And in mystical teachings, all the mystics associate consciousness and the I experience with the human heart.
Right.
Rather than the head. So in a way, it's the difference between the head doctrine versus the heart doctrine.
Right.
And so I think that modern
You've written
science...
a book called The Heart Doctrine.
Yeah, that's one of my
haven't you?
most important books, is The Heart Doctrine. I consider that my most important book. Because this is like the ultimate question in psychology and science today, is what is the nature of human consciousness? And it's not just an academic question, but it's profoundly important for all of us in knowing what we are as beings and what possibilities there are for us in our life. Life after death and higher states and so
Well,
on.
mystical teachings usually say that each cell is conscious, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't... That would be, yes. Yeah, there's even consciousness in stones in,
Right.
in the mineral kingdom. Like each realm has different form of consciousness.
Whereas we
But I
put
would-
it the mineral, vegetable, animal, and
Then kind of human
yeah.
is like the
human.
fourth level of
Right.
that. And then, you know, as one Kabbalist says, we live and die as a stone and we become a plant. And then we live and die as a plant, we become an animal. We live and die as an animal, become human. What fear should we have of death?
It's actually
You know,
it's actually Rumi who said that in
Oh, was
in a
it?
poem. Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
oh, okay, I
Yeah,
thought it
it's
was
a
a
Rumi.
Kabbalist thing too,
No.
but yeah.
Yeah. That's
So the
right.
mysteries of the human heart, and I believe there's a higher dimensional holographic physics to the human heart. And I've developed, my views on it are based on esoteric teachings. Like, it's not like Christopher Holmes concocted the heart doctrine.
Right, of course.
My work is based on my studies of a wide range of mystical teachings to understand what are the implications of these teachings for understanding human consciousness.
So it's one thing to study these teachings, it's another thing to take them to heart, if I may put it that way.
Yeah,
You know, like to
absolutely,
accept it
absolutely.
and to...
Yeah.
So there must be something that told you inside of you that...
Absolutely, and I think that's why we become interested in a subject matter, or is because it resonates with what our own experience. And in the Gurdjieff-Uspensky teaching, to understand that psychology, you have to work on yourself. You can't just understand it intellectually. You have to have experiences of what's being pointed to in all the mystical path. You know, it's useful to have the mental or cognitive understanding, but really the experience supplements that, and that's what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you've not just taken on mystical studies, but also physics and scientific studies, is that correct?
Yes, besides the issues of consciousness, my second major area of expertise is in creation physics. And I'm a specialist in Madame Blavatsky's volume 1 of the Secret Doctrine called Cosmogenesis. And this book was published in 1888, but it's absolutely amazing how Blavatsky anticipated what is now called vacuum genesis, kind of creation out of seeming nothingness, which isn't really the nothingness, but which is the plenum.
Right.
Blavatsky had similar concepts, and she regarded our universe as emerging from a point source, what I call a 0 point.
Right.
And in modern science, they
And
believe
it divides into 3, if I'm not mistaken, according to Blavatsky, right?
everything has a triune and sevenfold nature, according to Blavatsky and other esoteric
Yeah.
teachings. But I was just going to say, so
correct.
Blavatsky anticipated the modern concept of the origin of the universe from a singularity point. Like, it's so profound to think our huge, huge universe emerged from a point source. But she said it in 1888, over a century before modern scientists arrived at the same idea.
I think Sufi saints said it before that.
Yeah,
the prophets said it before that.
It's in
and
Hindu
it's
Vedic
it's in the
teachings.
Quran, it's in the Bible, it's everywhere.
Exactly, and it's in Kabbalistic
Yeah.
teachings, in Judaism, yeah. These mystic, see, modern scientists have become so arrogant, they've kind of dismissed the wisdom of the ancient traditions, the esoteric traditions. And that's why, like, I operate under the logo of 0 Point Institute for Mystical and Spiritual Science. Because what I'm trying to show is the scientific validity of mystical teachings as serious hypotheses. That this concept that consciousness originates out of the heart and it's connected to the blood flow in the body and the breath, that's a serious scientific hypothesis concerning the origins of consciousness. So I'm interested in that, synthesizing mysticism and science. And you mentioned, just earlier, you mentioned the idea of how the three, and just to elaborate, from my study of mystical teachings, I found that in different sources you find these two, the idea of the law of three and the law of seven. And the idea that God is first one, then three, then seven. Analogous to how you have white light divided by a three-sided prism gives you a spectrum of 7 colors. And in the Bible, we know that the initial impulse to creation, God says, let there be light.
And then
so then it would make sense that the three modes of nature form that triangle. And they stand for the principles of intelligence, energy, and matter. Whereas modern science is dualistic, matter and energy, but not intelligence. Whereas the new science and holographic theory regards information as latent within space itself. And information and mind is third force, in addition to matter and energy.
So in the Bible, when you say, let there be light, that's the singularity. What's the triune and what's the septune then?
Well, if you look at the book of Genesis, the second verse says the Spirit of God moves across the face of the water. So the Spirit of God would be represented by an upward turned triangle representing the element fire, and moves across the face of the waters. And the water is a downward turned triangle, and that gives you the Star of David. So that's the matrix of creation. So I would say the spiritual world and the material world both have that threefold nature.
I see. Okay. And what does the Star of David then represent?
Well, it represents the interaction of the spiritual world and the material world, or the elements of fire and water. So it represents the generative matrix out of which creation occurs. And then, see, I talk about what I call the secret of the seventh point, as elaborated by Blavatsky. And that's when you put a point at the center of the Star of David. See, Israel's flag, they use the Star of David, but there's nothing inside.
Right.
Whereas I would say that seventh point represents the Christ principle, or the divine spark within the human being. Whereas the Israeli Star of David, without a central point, it's like it's soulless, in a way. So,
elaborate a little bit. What do you mean by it's soulless in a way?
well, like Blavatsky, she takes the Star of David, but she puts an Ankh in the center of it. An Ankh is an Egyptian symbol for the life principle, or the living entity in the human being. So I'm saying the central point at the Star of David, it's like that first point. In the, God says, let there be light, and it establishes that first point. So we
the
each
point
have
comes
that
first,
first
and
point.
the Star of David is secondary, basically.
Yeah,
is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, the Star of David is provides the body, the matrix within that embodies that point. Yeah.
And then symbolically, like that Star of David holds a certain force or certain power, correct?
Yes, it's a profound mystical teaching, and I believe that creation manifests from within, without, from 0 point sources, and it embodies that Star of David pattern.
So behind that Star of David is the whole mystery behind the Big Bang, etc., etc.
Yes, yeah, I think it's a model of the forces latent in the quantum vacuum even before creation happens. And then when creation happens, these patterns manifest out of non-being, but they're already latent in non-being.
So more than the two triangles, it's 6 points. So what do the 6 points represent? We figured out, well, you told us what the seventh represents. What do the other 6 represent?
Well, three of them represent aspects of the physical matrix and aspects of the spiritual matrix.
Okay. Individually, each point doesn't represent something, though.
Well, each point would like I would take say the spiritual realm, and I would put information, matter, and energy as part of that, the spiritual world, and then on the material world. But the idea then, see, the Star of David in yoga, we find it is the symbol of the heart chakra. And my work is saying that living beings, you grow within, without, from 0 points related to the heart chakra. In the stanzas of Zen, from which the secret doctrine is based on, that it's said that the suns expand and contract through their own selves and hearts. So I believe you kind of grow in through your body, and when you have the original heart center, and then from the heart in the body we have the Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, 3 channels that connect 7 chakras. So it's a 1-3-7 pattern again. So there's a geometry to this. Like mystics believe that God geometizes in all manifestations. So I'm saying this pattern of 1, 3, and 7. Like you find it in the Kabbalistic tree of life. You have 10 sephira, or spheres, but there's 3 supernals. They're above what's called the abyss.
Right.
Because they're infinite, everlasting. So they're in the eternal realm. And then when creation happens, that 3 manifests 7 centers below. So you actually have an upward turned triangle representing the divine world. Then you have the spiritual world created below that, which is a reflection of that on a lower plane. And then you have a psychical world, another triangle, and then everything that culminates in Malkuth, which is a physical world made. Right. So really what we have is a series of triangles. So Kabbalah also embodies these principles.
So where's the 1-3-7 in Sufism?
I've not studied well enough to... I know Kabir a Sufi poet?
Yeah.
Kabir once said, "Inside this jar are 7 oceans and innumerable stars." So what are the 7 oceans? Well, according to Blavatsky, things emerge out of hyperspace. Like we have a created 4-dimensional space-time complex, but it's really rooted into a 7-dimensional hyperspace. So Kabir is saying 7 oceans. Oceans, water represents the Divine Mother or the ethers of space. So I'm saying space has an intrinsic 7-foldness to it. That's why creation manifests out of non-being. And when creation is manifest, there are 7 planes of being. Well, why are there 7 planes of being? Because there were 7 planes latent in non-being even before creation happens. See, there are patterns of existence latent in non-existence. Yeah, so when existence manifests, it manifests the patterns already inherent in the root principles.
As above, so below.
Exactly, exactly. So this idea of 7-dimensional hyperspace is really important, and I explore that a lot in my book on Blavatsky because it all ties into 7-dimensional string theory and M theory. Yeah.
Okay. So that's God, Science, and the Secret Doctrine.
Yeah. And all these ideas, we have this notion that God creates things out of light. Blavatsky calls light the great protean magician. It means that light can be created into any form. It's like the condensation of light. So the idea that there are these cosmic laws of 3 and 7, you find it in the Vedas, in Kabbalah, in Christianity, in the Gurdjieff teaching, in the Secret Doctrine. So I've studied the meaning of these metaphysical principles.
Okay, so you've studied the mystical principles, you've studied the science behind physics and quantum physics, more than likely.
Yeah.
How about the practical experience of these things? Have you experienced the realities? And if you have, then can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, through over 40 years, I've had different types of mystical experiences along the way. Like some of my earliest one, like Gurdjieff has the idea that people in life were ordinarily not properly conscious or awake. So we have to cultivate this state of wakefulness. And as you attempt to do it, you become aware of all these habits and things that preoccupy your mind. So you learn to free yourself of things. It's like as you become conscious of something, you can release it. So different periods in my life, like consciousness as light. Like I've had all kinds of experiences of enlightenment where you actually feel the interior light. And sometimes it's in the mind, and at one point I felt I could cast my mind into anything and truth would be revealed to me. It was like where I had experience of my third eye being opened. But the main light is within the heart. And mystics describe the self within the heart as being inherently self-illuminating, like the sun. So I believe there's this jiva atma, or monadic essence, connected to the heart, and it's inherently self-illuminating. So if you awaken your heart, you also feel the bliss of the heart, because you have the bliss sheath. And then you can have experiences of illumination. So I've had that, experiences of illumination and insights at times in my life, experiences when I was studying Blavatsky, and she talks all about the nature of the void. I've experienced different states of voidness and no-thingness.
Is that something you'd be able to share with someone else, or is that something you could help someone else experience?
I guess I try to help other people experience it in terms of talking about it. So that people have the concept of it, and then they have to bring their attention to it and study it through self-study. Like one of the most profound ideas is, I believe there's a form of nothingness at the heart of being. See, what is consciousness? Well, in a way, consciousness is a form of nothingness, because see, I can be conscious of all different things, the wall and things around me, or I could be conscious of thinking and feeling and sensation. But the consciousness itself is no thing. You see, it's a form of no-thingness at the heart of being.
Nothing you can grasp.
Yeah. In fact, it's because of their existence of this no-thingness that then you can be aware of all the things. You see, because you really are no thing. And that enables you to be aware of things. See, it's very profound. There's a quote from a Sufi master. He says, "Not since God brought man out of nothingness has he ceased to be a traveler." So in a way, I think we come out of nothingness, just like the universe did. You know, the universe emerged out of quantum, the vacuum genesis, it's called. Well, I believe in the heart of our being, in Kabbalah, they say when God creates human beings, he withdraws his potencies from a volume of space, which creates what he calls the zim-zum contraction. And we have that empty space within our hearts. That's why in our life we're seeking, I think we have deep spiritual remembrance of these higher states. So we want to fill the heart again. And we feel the emptiness in the heart, and people try to fill the emptiness through different ways. For some, it may be through acquiring material possessions, or power, or sexuality, different things we try to do to fill the emptiness. But the mystics say the only thing that can ever resolve that inner feeling of lack is the experience of God, or self-realization. So the idea that we have this nothingness at the heart of being is very beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. Now, in the day, in 2012, we have all these people going around and saying how this is a year of ascension and this is the year of destruction. Both principles are being shared in the world right now. What's your view on this whole idea of 2012?
Wow. In a way, I think initially, in part the idea was a confabulation of the Illuminati to kind of give an end point by which they're trying to move forward with their one world government plans. And it was useful to kind of create an end date to kind of work towards, to introduce the idea that there's going to be a new age. Because I've always wondered about, well, how do you arrive at December 21st from a Mayan calendar that's round, and they didn't have any of the same names we have for the months or the days or the years. Like, I don't know how, I've never really fully accepted that. I would.
And we've had destruction days all through our lives. I mean, I can remember in 1984 when the world was going to come to an end, and then 1994 and 2001,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
there's been so many days of destruction.
Yeah.
So what makes this one special, and why in this time is it also not just a year of destruction, but a year of ascension?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't understand it. I know when I woke up to first the fraud of 9/11, and then once I realized that, and you learn more and more about the criminality of the world elites, and really what's been done to humankind through the past decades.
Would you share a little bit about that?
Well, I was just going to say, I had a period of very, very elevated awareness where I thought I climbed the ladder of Jacob, seeing into higher worlds.
Wow.
And I channeled a set of revelations, which are at the beginning of my book. They're all in black. This is all revelations, and it's written in poetic form, which I never write poetically.
Right.
But it seemed to come to me from an elevated level within myself. And what this said to what was revealed to me was that 9/11 was going to bring these people down. They were going to be held accountable. And I believe that we'll have a new age when we can deal with the criminality of the world elites who have concocted these wars, who are spraying us with chemtrails, who are poisoning our food, and they don't have respect for human life. And so I see human beings. I think, man, there's evolution, and I think most people are controlled by their 3 lower chakras, and we've got to get to the 4th chakra is the next stage in human evolution, where humankind awaken and they recover their soul life and open their hearts. So I believe that's the next step in human evolution.
Where the majority of the inhabitants of the world are living in their heart is what you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah. And we've lost that feeling now, and we've been denigrated through our lives because the elites took over the educational system, and they tried to undermine the belief in religion, and they promoted science as contrary to religion, and religions as superstition. And even in the protocols of Zion, they said we want to cultivate a belief in Darwinianism, Marxism, and existentialism, all which deny the spiritual or soul nature of human beings. So I think we've been dummied down, and people have we've lost this knowledge of the soul life, which has been kept up in the esoteric traditions, you know, in yoga and Kabbalah and Christianity.
And mystic Islam.
Yeah. So I think we're at a very critical point in human history. It's like the crimes of the elites are so out of the realm, like they're so monstrous. It's like we have an elephant in the room and we can't ignore it anymore. We kind of have to deal with this criminality that's in a way degraded every aspect of our society, our healthcare, our education, our treatment of the environment, impoverishment of people, so many problems, and it all relates to this vast kind of criminal conspiracy that's really been brought into it's been established over decades and decades.
Now you're in Vancouver because you attended a conference and you spoke at a conference, is that correct?
Yeah, I came out to attend the 9/11 Truth Conference because I've done original research on 9/11, and my work, in my view, establishes that there were no airplanes, particularly hitting the South Tower, which is where we've seen 50 videos of it. But they're faked, in my view. There's no doubt that they're faked. An airplane could not possibly have just zipped into that hole in the tower and not had any impact effect upon hitting it and just disappear into the hole. So really, it's all it was video fakery and scripted witnesses. And as a forensic psychologist, I could just, in hearing the witnesses, I could pick out all these different elements that showed me that their testimony didn't hold true. So my article was on fabled airplanes and scripted witnesses. See, I believe that the media actually stages these events. They don't report them objectively as something apart from them. They stage these events. And when they're staging a black flag operation, the media will be all scripted ahead of time. They have who their witnesses will be and so on. And when I woke up after all this, at one point I felt I had attained spiritual knowledge, and they compared that to a sword. And I was dancing with my father's military sword, which is one of my magic objects. And it's like you can cut away with the sword. You can cut away what's non-essential to get the essence of something. And I felt I'd awakened, and I was watching the TV one day, and the Dawson College shooting was unfolding in Montreal. And I could tell just by the media coverage that the whole thing was staged.
Wow.
It was a black flag operation because they wanted new gun laws to restrict semi-automatic weapons. So they staged the whole thing. They leave 2 dead bodies there. But I could just tell from the media coverage it had been staged. It's particularly, and I wrote this all up, and I went to Montreal when it happened, and I distribute copies of my article out on the street.
And how was your article and how was your presentation received? Like,
no one ever says anything to me or gets back to me about anything. I've said it on my radio show too, repeatedly, that Montreal was a false flag event. You know, they had one witness. See, they had one witness, Tracy Yack, and just from my experience as a psychologist, I heard her testimony, but then I could see her little psychopathic smirk at the end of her testimony because she was self-satisfied with her performance. And that made me question a little psychopathic smirk. But then they had her on repeatedly, and I realized she at one point said that, well, I don't want to go into details about that too much,
No.
but I think the media actually play this role, creating propaganda, deceiving the public. They're not informing people. People have to turn their TVs off. I mean, if you awaken to it, then it's useful to watch a TV because you get the news there. But everything is distorted to us. Like now they're pimping a war against Iran, which could lead us into a 3rd world war. And it's absolutely horrible. We're the aggressor nations ourselves, like the Western world. We've just mass murdered millions of people over there. It's so tragic.
it is.
You know, and my heart cries out for justice. I'm a double Libra, so I really believe in justice, and that's when I experienced my revelations. It was like I felt the divine wrath within me. I'd never thought of God as wrathful.
Yeah.
Jews have that more in that
It's in
side
the Bible.
of God.
The wrathful God is in the Bible, and he's in the Quran too. And
Yeah,
okay, the New
yeah.
Testament kind of didn't see too much of it. But
No, and I had been versed more in New Testaments. I always thought of God as loving and peaceful, but when I woke up to 9/11, I felt the wrath of God move through me, and the judgments. In my book, I even say, I changed my website to, now I said, for the words and revelations and judgments of God. Like I felt that this is coming from a higher level in me. Just the injustice of it, the cruelty of it. And we've all suffered this through our lives, and people don't even realize what's been done to us. You know,
you mentioned the chemtrails.
I was just going to mention that.
Okay.
I think that's a prime example. They've actually been spraying us from the air for 15 years with particulate aluminum, strontium, heavy metals. They add arsenic, anthrax to some chemtrails. They put in different substances, nanoparticles now. These people, this is a psychopathic thing to do. And they want to demean us. They want to make people sick. They want us to be on pharmaceutical drugs. So it's hard for most people to even imagine such deviant things.
How would you respond to the skeptic out there? Or the one that says, you're a conspiracy theorist, or whatever?
I am a conspiracy theorist. What I say is, if anyone's not a conspiracy theorist, you're an idiot. Because you think history's not made up of people conspiring to do criminal acts? Of course. Even the government thinks there was a conspiracy of Muslims in 9/11. I mean, the government has its own conspiracy theorists. All of history is made up of conspiracies. The word conspiracy theorist was derived by the media as a way of labeling and dismissing people who have legitimate concerns about the network of these secret societies who have hijacked our nations and hijacked our governments. Our governments don't work for the people. Even we think we have a democracy. It's not really a democracy because there's this self-selection process by which the elites control who attains office, even down to voter fraud. And you have such a corrupt media. You can't have a democracy if the media completely deceives the populace. So it's quite tragic, the whole situation. I'm overwhelmed by it sometimes. I feel that sometimes it bears the sorrow of our endlessness, is a term from Gurdjieff. You know, and you wake up and you realize the horror of it all. And I've had, you know, it's been hard for me through the past years to kind of keep going and try to be brave in the face of it all.
So how does one respond to the idea of chemtrails and smart meters and all these things that are so detrimental to our well-being?
Well, I think we need to be waking people up and then bring these people to justice. I'm still striving that if we can wake the masses of people up, bring these people to justice, it would initiate a whole new age for us. I mean, if you arrested the people who were part of this criminal network, if you arrested them and seized their funds for all the terrorist activity they've committed, it would eliminate our national debt. And what came to me in my revelations was that if you had the last chapter, I call it the 0-point proposal, that if you criminally prosecuted the world elites for all their crimes against humanity, you would wipe out the debt of every nation on earth. You see, that's what you would do. Greece and Italy, all these nations massively in debt. Well, who's the debt to? It's the Rothschilds and the Zionists and the royal family, this whole network of these criminal elites. If we seize their assets, there'd be such wealth and abundance on the earth. People have had this poverty consciousness, like, you know, we can't have more than 6 billion or we're going to starve, you know. But all the problems of humankind have really been created by these elites. They create food shortages. They create weather phenomena, earthquakes, all these things. They've created chaos intentionally among the life of humankind. And they've hidden all these inventions that could be brought out and would solve the problems. Yeah. Like Stan Myers invented a car that would drive from the west coast of the United States to the east coast on 22 gallons of water. So you drive along the road, you pull over, you run out of gas, you might see things like this, that they've created this kind of poverty. Oh, they're going to run out of oil. And there was no need for it. And plus there are massive oil deposits which they have restricted people from accessing, drilling, because they wanted to impoverish the United States, the Americans. They intentionally have brought down America by eliminating the middle class and doing all these deviant things. So it's really quite tragic. I often in my book, I quote J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, and he says, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists." And that's totally appropriate. That's what it is. It's so monstrous. Like it's monstrous that they would spray us from above, and our kids and our land, spray us with all these toxic metals and neurotoxins from the sky. And they actually do that. You know, these people, there's something psychiatrically disturbed in them. That's why in my book, the subtitle refers to the ascendancy of the old world psychiatric disorder. Because they like to think, oh, it's a new world order, like, oh, something new and that's going to be creative and bring world peace. But it's not really. It's the old world psychiatric disorder. It's old world because these people have been around for decades doing all this, creating these wars and funding both sides and poisoning the population. They've been doing it for decades. So really it's the old world psychiatric disorder because these people are really quite psychiatrically disturbed. And I don't say that arbitrarily or lightly. Like, I'm a forensic psychologist. You know, I worked in the prison system for 12 years. I know what psychopaths are like. And these people, there's a kind of inbred and the psychopathy in them. They lack heart. They have no feeling of they lack the capacity of love or compassion for humankind. Like, why don't we ever have any leaders who have a magnanimity of heart? Eh? Some like leaders who really love and care for their people. We don't have that. And these networks have infiltrated all these countries and put their puppets into power, who serve the corporate and banking elite and betray the people of their own country. It's really all quite tragic. And
what's the answer?
I don't know. If I knew the answer, we wouldn't be in the situation.
What's the
I mean,
next step?
all I knew for myself when I had this period of revelations, I thought it was all going to unfold by 2012, and all I had to do was do whatever I can to help bring that about. And I've done that through my writing my books, my own radio show.
And here's 2012, and we're not there.
No, but at least now it's possible. One doesn't know that. See, I believe there are a lot of people on the inside who don't like what's been done. And a lot of people get wrapped up in it and hate it in a way, what's been done and being part of it. And I haven't given up that it might turn and that these people could be brought to justice. So whatever, I believe what's unique in my work, I've never heard anyone else suggest anything like the 0-point proposal. Just imprison these elites around the world. You reduce every national debt in the world to zero, and all countries retain ownership again of their own natural resources. So you have Exxon is in Nigeria saying big gas plants. Well, those are now owned by the people of Nigeria. Everybody again owns their own resources.
Well, that'd be nice.
There's no reason for all this poverty and wars. There's no reason for it all. They've created this, and they've sown animosity between people because they divide and conquer. I mean, they'll go bomb a Sunni temple and blame it on the Shia, and then they'll bomb a Shia temple and blame it on the Sunni, and then they will send arms to both sides so that they fight each other and they can't lose. This is the kind of thing they do, fermenting these wars and hatred around the world, always based on lies. You know, London train bombings, it was a lie. You know, it wasn't Muslim terrorists. You know, what we've done to, you know, the anti-Semitism and hate that we've perpetrated against Muslim and Near Eastern people is terrible. You know, Christians need to be ashamed of themselves as Christians. Like, what happened to Christianity? You know, the love of your fellow neighbor and the love of truth and the love of justice. And we have to.
That's every faith, it's not just Christianity.
Yeah, it's every faith, yeah. Now I say Christian partly because I came out of that Christian background, so it affects me more to see what's become of that. You know, my parents were very devout Christians, so it breaks my heart to kind of see how did the churches become hijacked, just like the government and like the military. You know?
Yeah. That's a whole other subject, isn't it? How did the churches become hijacked?
Yeah, and that's very complex, and I think so much has been hidden from us. You know, you see the corruption of the Vatican. They have a huge library, over 100,000 volumes, all about the early Christian period and that, and it's all been hidden from us. You know, we don't know. Yeah, so much has been hidden from us. It's quite tragic. They haven't wanted us to
at least
be
they trickled the Dead Sea Scrolls to us.
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's valuable things that have come out for sure. You know, it's kept us, many of us, you know, we want to know what really happened. These are profound mysteries. But I see life sometimes, I think of it like Lord of the Rings tale. We're on a great big Lord of the Rings adventure. And book 2 of Lord of the Rings is the Two Towers, the New York Towers. And at that time, these forces of evil are kind of taking over the world, and they're breeding in human types and destroying the environment. But what's happening is that there's these forces of light around the world, people waking up and coming together. Yeah. So I believe we're in this grand Lord of the Rings tale. And the book 3 of the Lord of the Rings is a return of the king. And to me, that means the return of righteousness to the world. So I'm not in, at times, despair a bit, but I'm still holding out hope. I still hold out hope that we can turn the table on these people, and it would bring about a new age. We would have such abundance and opportunity that we never knew was possible.
Isn't that going to inevitably happen anyways, slowly, or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if they begin a nuclear war, like nuclear bombs,
Okay,
you know.
well, nuclear war means the destruction of them too. They can't be.
Well, they hide under the ground, and they may have off Earth bases, which I believe it is very possible. And I believe there's massive cities under the ground they want to hide off. You have to understand the work of the mentality of a psychopath in a way, how they can be self-destructive. Like you wonder, well, how would these people, they spray us with chemtrails, but they're taking them too. And it's like a psychopath would do that anyway, in a way. It's like almost self-destruct. But
So in the process of self-destructing, in the process of destructing, they'll self-destruct.
Yeah, and in a way they won't give thought to that because they'll be able to be making all the monies they want and are part of this big plan, and in a way they have a big ego, so they'll kind of think that they're not susceptible to the same illnesses, and they don't think it out. They're short-term motivated rather than long-term. But my hope is still that these people be brought to justice, and I've always felt that the 9/11 was the critical event, because when you realize our governments lied to us about 9/11 and the media lied to us, you begin to realize the scope of this conspiracy and how they've infiltrated and taken over our society. So I think 9/11 is potentially the straw that breaks the camel's back, or yeah. And the more and more 9/11 truth is coming out now, realizing the role of the media in creating 9/11 is very important. Yeah.
Well, Christopher, you're here in Vancouver now. When are you coming back? Because I want you to give a talk here, or maybe a presentation.
I'd be very
preferably
pleased
on the
to.
heart doctrine.
Well, yeah, I would. I like when I gave a talk the other day that you attended. I wanted to begin with some of my discussion of mystical concepts about the heart and the self, and because in a way we need that spiritual knowledge to feel empowered, and what we need is an alliance of people around the world who are what I would call upright of heart, meaning that their heart is controlled by higher motives, spiritual motives, rather than people whose heart is controlled by the lower motives associated with money, sex, and power, more material realm. Not that there's anything wrong with those realms, but just we need the awakening of the heart, and I think that's our entry into a new age. Yeah.
You had mentioned an initiative when I was at the talk on Sunday. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had thought of running for the leadership of the Canadian Action Party, which I'd worked with for several years before, and I developed a number of policies for them, which included policy against chemtrails, to stop chemtrails, stop enforced inoculations, investigate the RCMP and military for their betrayal of the Canadian public around 9/11. So I may step forward to become the next leader of the Canadian Action Party, even though I hate the idea of being in politics, because I'm really a more reclusive person.
It'll be interesting to find out what happens when you're actually there.
Yeah, well, I would stand out. I would have a much more, see, CAP traditionally has focused on the monetary issue and using the Bank of Canada, but my focus as leader of CAP is to tell people we're facing the new world order. These are a group of psychopaths who want to mass murder you and your children. We have to stand up to these people and take our country back. We need a government that serves us, and we don't want the government doing all these black operations with everyone. It's terrible what the government is doing. You know, let's have sane government. So you know, most people across Canada, the majority know 9/11 was a fraud. If we can communicate with people, I would like to try to take back our country and bring these people to justice for the crimes they've committed against us. I look at the government of Canada. What's Harper guilty of? Accessory after the fact to mass murder. How about that? Obstruction of justice, treason, racketeering with the criminal corporate elite. He pays $300 million to give all the girls in Eastern Canada Gardasil vaccinations. Which causes infertility, all kinds of medical problems. They don't do any follow-up because our government is controlled by these corporate elite. It's totally tragic. It's outrageous. It outrages me as a moral person. And I, you know, partly, I had 2 sons in the military. And I always respected the military. And when I found out about 9/11, my son was ready to go to Afghanistan. Now, it's one thing to have your son go to a war where you kind of think that, you know, that we do need to fight Muslim terrorism. But then you find out the whole thing was a fraud. It's terrible. I felt outraged, you know. And now my sons are in the military. I don't want them to be serving these deviant groups because our young men and women go into the military because they have a good heart and they want to fight for their country, you know. So I want the military to fight for our country and arrest these elites.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, I believe it can turn. I believe it can turn. I'm looking forward. If I run for CAP, I'm going to go to military bases. Tell them that their senior military need to be charged for treason and war crimes. We've taken part in 2 criminal wars, Afghanistan and Libya. They're criminal wars. So let's bring these people to justice. And until we deal with these gross criminality of the elites, it's like an elephant in the room. If we can't deal with them, we have no future other than sickening and death. You know? So we have, you know, this is a critical time in human history.
Yeah, we all need to come together.
We need to come together. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Christopher.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.